Hello, Bo Ferdinand Moxhol Fatum again, my name. I'm from Lillebælt Academy from Denmark, Odense, also called the University of Applied Science. This is the second bit of sustainability, or the impacts of tourism, called the socio-cultural impacts. So it's a continuation of the economic impacts. I'll use my PowerPoint now. Yep, this is what you saw before. This book, the cover of it, by Luc and other authors. So that's the tourism sustainability, and I will move on to what we got to, which was socio-cultural impacts, in continuation of the economic impacts. So Smith in 1989 did different tourist types, and you can see yourselves if you fit into any of these categories, because you could also say that these tourist types are a kind of a pre-runner to the different segments you can have. You know, active, inactive, modern, and traditionalist, if you're talking about lifestyle. But here you got the explorer, the elite, offbeat, off the beaten track, I think, and then unusual, incipient, and the mass tourist, and the charter tourist. The all-inclusive, the last one, yeah? And then another guy called Plug has some other kinds of typologies. Either you're psychocentric, it means you want to not just spend too much time with others. And then mid-centric, bit of both. And then allocentric, you really like to be with people. So, but these are just different typologies of tourists. And then you can see here the social and cultural impacts. Authenticity, cultural pride, demonstration effect, education and crime, and I'll run through them here in a minute. So, but the key environmental impacts, which is one of these ones here, let's see, no they weren't, they're different ones, these ones. But environmental impacts of tourism could be pollution, and that could be physical, or could also be noise. Too much use of the land, degrade the environment, the wildlife, but otherwise you could have some positive stuff like getting education, like what you're doing right now, getting education and awareness, funding to help the environment, public or private, and volunteer tourism programs. There's a lot of people doing volunteer jobs. So sustainability, what is it? The traditional worldview. You believe in limitless resources and continuous progress of the necessity of growth. And you have faith that we can solve things using science, technology, and and then the strong commitment that we can solve this economically as well. So, sustainable tourism development. Of course, it's based upon the local host communities. And of course, you have to satisfy the demands of the tourists and the industry. And of course, you have to safeguard the environmental resources, using caring about the natural build and cultural components to achieve these aims. Of course, sustainable tourism development has to have some aims. And you could say the stakeholders are mainly locals and the tourists, and of course the tourism industry. And these are the management strategies. So obviously this is a management tool. The resource audit means to see how much have we got and what can we do with it within the tourism sector. So that's more or less to audit the whole tourism sector as one. And then you can look at the environmental impact assessment of, say, a new tourist venture. You can have the indirect management techniques. What can you alter, change physically? What do you need to do informational wise? Could be internal or external information, and then eligibility, sorry. And then sustainable tourism development. This is a continuation. So you must meet the needs of the locals. Sorry, I went backwards there, didn't I? Management strategies, these are direct ones. We had indirect and direct. Yeah. So the direct management techniques, you enforce it, you can zone, spoke of that about that before, making sure the tourists can go in that zone and not that zone. Rationing of intensity, how many people can be at that place, or how intense is that being visited, that zone of, say, the wilderness area. And you can have a restriction on activities. You cannot do this, you cannot walk there, you cannot bring a dog here, or you cannot swim here, or you cannot have a bonfire. Different kinds of direct management techniques. So these are more or less like you cannot do. And that was more or less it. Then I've got another view on this by Holloway. And he's here. So these are the socio-cultural impacts. Another author called Holloway. So these are the different benefits. Understand societies, have links, means people meet people, links with regions and countries. You retain the cultural heritage, and then widen tourist cultural interests again with food and drink. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? But there is culture, languages and food, I suppose. The disadvantages are more. Too many people at once can create a friction between the locals and the guests, and it can invite crime, sexual exploitation, different kinds of employment, maybe disrupt the local culture, working culture with agriculture or something else, and then people don't want to work in that industry, the agricultural industry, only work in tourism, and that can disrupt the local employment patterns in industry, and it can corrupt some people. If you see, certainly you've got tourism, and then you think you can make a lot of money on it, and then you can have these commercial, superficial relations, but that is business, I suppose, sometimes. So the nature of host and guest relations here means they're transitory and superficial, so they're not in depth. These are negative sides of it, and there's too much of a shortage of time to meet each other, guest and host, and there's not much spontaneity in it, and unequal, unbalanced, because sometimes if it's from the developing world, maybe they don't have as much money as the developed world, rich and poor, so it's not a balanced relationship. Now there's something on demonstration effect. That's a good term to remember, and it's more or less the locals adapting the behavioral patterns of the guests or the tourists. And just remember that tourists always behave differently, or we always behave differently when we're on holiday than we would at home, usually worse. Like Spain did away a few years ago with the lager louts, which was happy hour for English tourists. Went down to south of Spain, and the happy hour where here you get 2 tequila sunrises for one, and then cost a lot of drunk people in the streets, and they did away with that because it affected also the locals, but also the brand. So the demonstration effect, locals are adopting the pattern of the guests. Authenticity, stage authenticity. Well, it's where you enact different old-fashioned folklore or something plays when it's nothing to do with real life, but it's demanded by the tourists. You can have in local villages, say South America or some African villages or wherever it is, you can reenact some tribal patterns or dances, and then the tourists can take pictures and think they've experienced something really traditional, where usually it's staged. And then you got the social impact. How do you manage it? Well, you have to have the local, as in anything. If the locals are not involved in it, then it will go bad and sour. And also you have to concentrate it in various regions, so you know exactly where the tourists are and are not. And it's also to do with tourism planning again, involve the locals, because it's not just a top-down, it's a bottom-up approach as well. So here are some benefits for tourism. And of course, again, if they make money on it, and you get adequate skills and finance. Yeah, that's the last one, available to encourage local investment. But of course the locals benefit from tourism, but it has to be planned properly. So you got local authorities involved, and the locals, and management and training. Training is usually a problematic area. I think in Denmark we got about 7% of the tourist workforce, they are trained. So yeah, I always say to my students, good luck. But anyway, there's more and more. I'll skip over this one. 10 principles for sustainable tourism. You can have a look at this. It's got something to do with resources, consumption, waste, diversity, planning, local economies, stakeholder analysis, you should know that, and training of staff, and then marketing, and then doing continuous research. Number 10 is really important because it's continuous all the time. And then you got the guidelines for sustainable tourism, a bit like in continuation of what we said before. So protect the environment. You had that list from before with flora and fauna, and respect for local cultures. And then again, all the other things, yeah. Minimizing pollution, depending again on which destination you're at. That was it. Thank you. The next one will be the environmental impacts of tourism. End of that.